Welcome to the Center for U.S. War Veterans Oral Histories at the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey in Seagirt, a partner of the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. Today is December 16, 2015. I am Carol Fowler, Director of the Center. My honored veteran is John Shapowski, who served with the United States Army from June of '66 until March of '68, and again from August of '70 to November of '94. And he is a retired Command Sergeant Major. He served in the Vietnam War as well as Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and during the Cold War. Thank you for wanting to be here today. May I call you Jack?
Please.
Your eyewitness account is considered a primary historical source and a valuable contribution to the Veteran Oral History Project. And good morning and welcome.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And I should also say that you served as a radio operator, radio teletype operator, helicopter door gunner, Morse code intercept operator, signals intelligence, electronic warfare chief. Is that it?
That's correct. And then he also was a first sergeant and then eventually is a command sergeant major.
Okay. Take me back to life prior to service. Had anyone in your family served before you?
My dad was in World War II, was in the Merchant Marines, which eventually they were given veteran status. And I had a couple of uncles who were in the Army, and also my father's cousin who was in the Navy, who was a radio operator, who had sailed to Hawaii on the Arizona and was a radio operator with the Navy. And he was the person who first sent the first radio messages out from Pearl Harbor saying we're under attack. That was Ed Shapowski.
Oh,
so
my
that's
goodness.
Interesting. He eventually retired out in Montana, and he died about 4 years ago.
How about that? Did he enjoy any kind of fame or anything from that?
Yes, he had some notoriety. You could find him on the internet. He was often spoke at local gatherings and things like that. And there was, of course, a story when he died, that type of thing.
And also he sent the message, but it wasn't believed?
No, it was the actual, after they were under attack. He was sending the messages back to the mainland, that they were under attack. And it wasn't a drill. This was, we are actually under attack by the Japanese.
What did he ever tell you about it himself?
Well, he told me the story of how it happened, how he had worked the shift and the evening shift and gotten off, and he was it was Sunday morning, we all know that, December 7th, and he was going to have, as I recall, what he told me, he was going to go have breakfast with his friend who was on the Arizona, but the attack took place, and then he rushed back to his workplace and started, he was sending out the message until he was properly relieved by a more senior person.
So what was the length of time that he was saved, the time that he left the Arizona to the time that the Arizona went under?
Gee, I'm sorry, I don't. This was in later years. I got to talk to him. And this was all over the telephone. So.
Okay. He lived far away.
Yeah, he lived in Montana. I lived up here in New Jersey.
But you think about it, it's a miracle that he's alive. He was alive after.
Yes, and actually, and then eventually he got offshore duty, and he was on a couple of ships. Sailed on a couple of ships. Ironically, most of my family were sailors, not Army. But I did have a couple of relatives, one uncle and a cousin who were in the Army. So.
And what about your dad? Did he ever speak about what he saw in the war?
Yeah, he did a little bit. The Merchant Marines, and they were the logistics arm for the services, and he spent a lot of time in the Pacific, and they actually, he said, they was out by Australia, somewhere in New Zealand, Australia, in that area, and they were literally a floating supply dump. And you anchored your ship and you just waited until it was your turn, until they called you forward so they're going to unload your cargo, usually bombs or ammunition, things of that nature. And so what he used to do for kicks was he hooked up with some people, and he'd go out on PT boats and they'd make the patrols, go at night with them on the patrols. So he was a young guy, 19, and of course everybody craves a little, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people crave excitement, and I'm sure it was very boring sitting on a ship, being anchored, off the coast, just waiting until you were called forward to offload. So yeah, he talked about that, and a couple of I remember him telling me, my brother and I, one story of how they were on a large convoy leaving from the West Coast, and you had Navy escorts, but his ship was older, and he couldn't keep up. So he said it was kind of you had that sinking feeling in your heart as you watched the convoy pull away.
Oh my goodness.
They came back, and the Navy came back and asked them what speed they could maintain, and it was not sufficient enough to keep up with the convoy, so the Navy said, good luck, we'll see you at the other end.
Huh.
So they basically sailed across by themselves, the rest of the convoy just moved forward. So they certainly weren't going to wait for them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so anyway, stories like that, it was awesome.
And he did well, right?
My dad?
Financially with the Merchant Marines compared to veterans?
Well, I don't know if you did well, but you got paid better. But actually, you're safer in the Navy. Your chances of getting killed were much greater in the Merchant Marines. In the Navy, you were much safer.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, and the great irony there is if you're in a Merchant Marines and you have your ship sunk out from under you, you lost your paycheck. You didn't get paid until you got onto another ship.
Oh, I never knew that.
Oh, sure. So, there's two sides to that issue. And,
right.
The really sad thing, though, is that my dad died of in 1985 of a form of muscular dystrophy. And unfortunately, he was never given veteran status until after he died. So he was never able to get any of the veterans benefits or anything like that. But he was at sea just like the Navy, for as long as the Navy, that type of thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so.
What year did it go to veteran status?
Well, I don't know. It didn't make any difference then. It was sometime after 85. He'd already died. So.
That's something that it took it that long, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. I can only guess that a lot of it was money. It cost you money if you're going to bring all those people into the system, into the VA system.
All right. So, how did you come to be in the service?
I was drafted.
Okay.
And I remembered signing up for selective service in my hometown. I was born and raised in Webster, Massachusetts, and I remember the office quite well. Went in there and signed up. And
because you were a college student?
No, everyone had to. When you turned 18, you had to register for the selective service, which was your local draft board. And so I registered, and then some months later I got a call to come take a physical, so they gave me a physical. And then at that time I was a full-time night student in college.
Oh, okay.
But I was a night student, not a daytime student. And because of that, my classification was 1A, so I was draft eligible. Now, it all went according to your local draft board. My friend that I went to high school with lived in the next town, which put him in a different draft board, and he was taking one course at night, and he was 2S. So he had a student deferment for one course, but I was 1A with a full.
Doesn't make sense, right? It's just.
Well, I think it was based on the male population of your town and the enlistment rates of the people. So I think that's how the quotas were set. Again, I think I'm not.
Yeah, it
positive,
sounds right. Yeah.
But I believe that's the way it worked. So in my hometown, we had a bigger male population, so I'm sure the numbers were greater. So anyway, after I'd registered and had the physical and I was classified 1A, I knew my number was going to be coming up. So I walked into the selective service, the lady there, and I said, "When is your next call?" Well, I said, when do you think I'll get called? She says, "Oh, probably in the next 2-3 months." And I said, "Well, when's your next draft call?" She says, "10th of June." I said, "Yeah, just put me on it." At least this way I know I'm not sitting around waiting. And figured I might as well, get it over with. So that's how I entered the service. And went to Fort Dix for basic training. And the great irony here is that when I was 14, I had a problem with my right eye, which I have to this day, and I lost the central vision. So I have peripheral vision, but no central vision. And up until that time, I had 20/20, pretty good vision. But so anyway, I got the physical, and they had the initial one. They said it was okay to go in. When I got to Fort Dix, they did another physical, and the Army doctor there some captain, and he said, "Oh, you know, your eye's pretty bad. We should go over to the hospital and take a look at that." So they brought me to the hospital at Dix, and the head of that department called in the other doctors, and they were all looking at my eye and doing this ooh and ah, and it was kind of a tutorial. He was pointing out to his subordinates, you know, this problem with the eye. And then, out of the clear blue sky, he turned to me and he said, "Okay, well, what would you like to do? You want to stay?" And I was a little surprised and frankly taken aback, and I said, "Oh," I said, "do you mean I have a choice?" He says, "Yeah, you can get out if you want, you know." And I really only thought about it for a few seconds, and I said, "No," I said, "I think I'd rather stay and be drafted, you know, stay in the Army." And it was this, I was 19 years old, just turned 19, and I came from this very small town, very, very, you know, kind of naive, going to the big city, going to Worcester, Massachusetts, you know, that was the big city type thing. And I kind of realized that if I wanted to break out and experience things bigger and, you know, beyond Webster, this is, I'd have to do it this way. This would actually be the ticket out, so to speak. And the other was, you know, your curiosity. You know what the Army's like. You know, my uncle was in the Army, and, you know, other people I knew. And I had friends who were in the service at that time that I had gone to high school with. They were already, you know, entering the service. Candidly, there was a war going on, and I was kind of, you know, a little curious about that too. It was over on the other side of the world, and I thought if I got drafted, maybe they'd send me there. Maybe they'd send me to Germany or Korea or someplace. So it really, I viewed it as this opportunity to, you know, kind of break out, broaden my horizons. And if I stayed there in Webster, it just, you felt like you were sentencing yourself to a small town existence, that type of thing. And I really wanted to experience more than that, you know. So I told him I'd go ahead and stay. And the captain who brought me over was upset with me for that.
Oh, okay.
Well, I think he was a draftee too, and, you know, they drafted doctors back then, you know, so. And I don't think he was real crazy about the Army, to be quite frank. So when I turned down the opportunity to get out, I think he was a little upset with me. But it was my choice. It's my life, my choice, you know, that type of thing. So that is how I entered the Army.
Do you have any stories from basic training? What kind of adjustment was it for you?
Actually, it wasn't too hard of an adjustment. It was a very regimented life. But I think, you know, anyone who's older than me says, "Oh, you guys had it easy." But I'll say my basic training was hard. Physically, it was hard. And up until just a couple of years ago, I went through basic in June, July, and August of 1966. And for decades, that was the hottest summer in New Jersey on record.
Oh my gosh.
And they just broke that record a couple of years ago here. But up until that time, that was the hottest summer on record. And we had, because it was the Vietnam era, they weren't real easy on us. And that was, you know, you guys better shape up, you better learn this stuff, you better be in shape because, you know, you're all going to go to Vietnam. There's a good chance you'll all go to Vietnam. So it was hard. But again, the adjustment was not too difficult. That was, you know, getting up early, because I always got up early in the morning. You know, I'd get up, I went to work. I worked, my dad owned a junkyard back in Massachusetts, and so you got up early, you went to work, and there was a regimen to your life, and that was not so hard. The training was new and interesting. Some of it was, candidly, was kind of, you know, boring. You did your drill and ceremony and things like that. That's after a while. It's, you know, how many times do I march and make a left turn, right turn, about face, you know, that kind of thing. But some was rather interesting, and we learned. We had all the classes, the tests. We had a lot of range time. You know, we went out, and of course the culmination there was qualifying on your rifle. That was the big event. We did a bivouac. The one interesting little, quick little story. Well, they interview you when you first went into basic training after perhaps a week or 2 weeks, and I don't recall exactly when, but it was early. And what they try to do is to get you to enlist for another year or 2 years. And the big thing there was you could choose your what they call an MOS, military occupational specialty.
Right.
And so we were all interviewed and what have you. And I was interviewed by WAC, and I was threatened. Well, if you don't enlist and sign up for another year, you know what's going to happen to you. You're going to go to infantry, AIT, and you're going to go to Vietnam. I said, well, maybe. And I had actually complained to another senior NCO about that later on. He said, yeah, he said, I've heard that before. We're going to have a talk to her, or talk with her. But yeah, she was trying to kind of force people. But a couple of guys did, not too many. Most of us just said, hey, we're draftees, we're going to go ahead and whatever comes our way, we'll take. And again, very, very interesting. Coming from a small town, you met people, most of the people were from the Northeast, but New York, New Jersey, quite a few from Massachusetts, Connecticut, that type of thing. And all from, very varied backgrounds, different levels of education. A lot of us had college, some college, that type of thing. It was the first time I was ever really exposed to black people. I'd never been around black people before in my life, and we have black people in our company. The service was, well ahead of the country in that regard. They, integrated.
Oh, that's a good
service.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, well ahead of the, Harry Truman, I think, did that.
That's right.
And
And I'm thinking of 1966, the race riots.
yeah, there was the
Service was well ahead of
yeah, you
the
had
rest.
So, and later on too, you had there were riots, but yeah, we were actually it's at like the current movies and things, the Band of Brothers. Your basic training was the same way. You're in this thing together. We're all trying to tough it out and make it together. So everybody is supportive. Everyone's supporting each other.
That's
that
good.
type of thing. Yeah, we didn't. There wasn't any shunning anyone or any of the racial problems or things.
Oh, okay.
It's all we need to get through this thing. And that's what we did. We all, again, banded together. And again, basic training was kind of hard. They were, back then you didn't have the Kevlar helmets. You had a two-piece thing. You had a helmet liner and you had your steel pot. And it's like, remember the movie Patton where he stood there giving that speech? That was the helmet liner, he was wearing. But you'd sit there in a classroom, and it was so hot outside, and they had this one classroom that was air conditioned, and they'd run you from the heat into that air-conditioned classroom, and of course you're not getting a lot of sleep anyway, and guys would nod off. And what they would do, they'd take those helmet liners and bop you over the head. I mean, they weren't gentle about it either. It's that kind of thing. There was it's not that they beat us up, but there was some physical contact, back then with the drill sergeants.
Back then, yeah.
Yeah, but it's changed today. It's changed. But anyway, most of us made it through. There was a crazy thing at the end of basic training. We had just graduated, and there were two guys that were holdovers because they had both broken an arm, and they were carrying a bucket of water. And it was ironic that one had a broken left hand, one had a broken right hand. And between the two of them, they were carrying this bucket of water. They were on some detail watering some plants. I don't remember the names, but yeah, a couple of guys got hurt, but nothing too bad. Yeah. Anyway, and then should I just continue? Or?
Yeah, I think Fort Gordon you mentioned, right?
Well, my first AIT was at Fort Dix. It was a radio operator school. It was the MOS is 05B, and I went. We again stayed on Fort Dix. We were just transferred over, actually right across from the next to the WAC barracks. Our company. We had two buildings. The company was so big they split it in two, made two companies out of it. And we'd march across the field by the hospital, where the hospital is. And we went to school in these old buildings, and I think they used to be stables.
Wow.
They were low, one story, and I'm almost positive that's what they were. They were converted stables. And we learned what they call slow speed Morse code, but you learned how to be a radio telephone operator. The radio guy, you see him in combat, the guy with the back of the radio. That was the training we're receiving. But so we did that. That was supposed to be 10 weeks, but if you did well, they took the people who were at the top of the class, and they would send them down to Fort Gordon, Georgia for radio teletype school.
So I take it you were at the top of the class?
I was one of the, I was at the top of the class. And so I was...
Did you enjoy the work?
It was interesting, the training. It was, being exposed to this, things that you only saw in the movies, the radios, that kind of thing. And I was never a Boy Scout, so I didn't learn Morse code and...
Oh, okay.
All of that, but it was mostly radio telephone operations, that kind of thing.
You were never a Boy Scout, so you probably never went camping or anything?
No, not. I spent a lot of time in the woods. My dad had 40 acres for a backyard, so we would spend a lot of time in the woods, but I didn't go camping per se. But anyway, went to that school. That was 7 weeks, and again, it was 7 weeks for me, okay? So I did, we went, I think we flew out of Philadelphia. The experience there, this was the first time in my life I had ever been on a jet. And they put us all on a bus and loaded us up into a plane, and off we went. And we flew from Philly to, it must have been a chartered flight, and we came into Augusta, Georgia. I guess it was probably Bushfield. But the thing that I really remember about that was that we got off, they put us on buses, and the buses drove down Tobacco Road. And this was the old Tobacco Road with the shanty huts and the stuff you saw in the movies that we had never seen up north. And my mouth must have been wide open looking at it and said, oh my God, this stuff really does exist. And I can tell you that I've been back to Fort Gordon many, many years later. That Tobacco Road no longer exists. It's all been torn down, and it's all developed now, etc. But when we drove from the field to Fort Gordon in 1966, it was rural shanty huts, that kind of thing.
Like very, untouched by time?
Almost, yeah. Very poor people, that kind of thing. But that was Fort Gordon. And anyway, we arrived there, and we stood in front of a theater, and I was actually put in charge of the group. So we get down there and got them all organized and what have you. And I still remember we stood in formation, and we passed all of our records. We were hand carrying our records, and this is way before computers and things like that. Everything was typed and what have you. So I had my records along with everyone else. All the records were passed to the right. They were brought into this wooden movie theater, and the people sat up there in the theater, the clerks and personnel, NCOs, whoever they were, and making assignments, assigning us to different companies and battalions to go to this radio teletype school. And they keep calling all of the people. They're calling them out one at a time. Private Smith, Private Jones. They call them up, and then they get reassigned. And I've waited and waited, and finally just about everyone is gone. So I went up to one of the NCOs there, and I said, I think there's something wrong here. I said, I came down with this group, and they're all gone. And I'm still here, and what have you. So they went and couldn't find my records that I had hand carried and passed to the right, and they went into the theater. I have no idea where those records went. And I bring this up because it affected me down the road.
Wow, they really were never found?
They were never found.
What do you think happened to them?
I think they were sent out to some other unit, and somebody said, I don't know who this guy is, and threw them away. That's what I think happened. So those were my original records, the official records. So they were lost. So that, that was in, I guess October or something like that. Yeah, September, October. That was in October of 1966. I go through the radio teletype school, and it was, they were so busy at that time. It was the only radio teletype school the Army had. So that they had other O5B schools around the country, different forts, but all of the people who came for this radio teletype came to Fort Gordon. So we met a bunch of guys from different places, different parts of the country, different forts, took basic training in different places. And met some friends and that type of thing. And but it was different living. I lived in concrete and brick buildings at Fort Dix. You get down to Fort Gordon, it was the old wooden two-story World War II barracks. You walked in, and this was a cultural shock. You walked in the back door, and there was a latrine to the left, and it had basically like a trough for a urinal. But the thing that got me was there were 8 commodes, and there were no walls, no stalls, just 8 commodes. So there was absolutely no privacy whatsoever. And they had a couple of rooms in those buildings, and those were for the cadre, the NCOs who were either working at the schoolhouse as instructors or like drill instructors for the platoon sergeants, if you will, for the soldiers. But we lived in open bays, and there were double bunks. So I had the top bunk, and I had a little skinny wall locker, and I had a foot locker. And so the living actually wasn't as good as Fort Dix, with the exception of the mess hall, because we had our own company mess hall, which was kind of nice, so that you got to know the cooks. And that part was pretty good. And but anyway, a lot of memories and what have you. But to kind of move along, the thing with the records, I finally finished the course, and this is, well, I went home for Christmas. Maybe I'd like to bring that. Not maybe. I'd like to bring that up. Christmas is coming up, so we're all going to go home on Christmas leave. And we didn't make a lot of money back then. It was, I'll round it off and say you got $100 for a month, and you have to make that do. And I had 9 brothers and sisters and my folks, and
Oh my goodness.
trying to buy Christmas presents, for everybody, and you're stretching your money. So myself and a lot of guys, all you could afford to get home was a bus, and it was the bus. They had brought the buses right onto Fort Gordon. You didn't have to go downtown. They lined them up, and it took 24 hours in a Greyhound bus, to get from Augusta, Georgia to Worcester, Massachusetts. And my dad picked me up there, when I came in Worcester. But 24 hours, and it was 24 hours back.
Oh, gosh.
So that's how I got home on Christmas leave. But it was nice. It was nice to come home. Again, I want to jump back a bit. We had mentioned my friend Norman Naparata, who was
Oh,
killed,
yes.
he was killed in Vietnam.
Yes.
He was the first guy from, as I said, I went to school with him from kindergarten to 12th grade. And unfortunately, as I said, he was killed over there. But when I got my orders to go from Fort Dix to Fort Gordon, I was given the pass. I came home on a weekend pass, and I was with my brother, and who was giving me a ride back to the bus station at that time. But it was a great irony, but his wake was that weekend.
Oh.
So it was on a Sunday, and my brother and I left. I said goodbye to my family, and then my brother and I went to Norman Naparata's house and attended his wake. His body was in his parents' home, not at a funeral parlor.
That was an old-fashioned way that they did it back then, right?
Well, that's what they chose to do. But
And what did you know about what happened to him?
it was a booby trap, unfortunately.
Oh.
Yeah.
And he was a Marine?
He was a Marine, yeah. And again, it was a booby trap. And he was the first person from our hometown to die in Vietnam. But it was a sad event, but I was glad, the timing. At the time he was there, so I could go. Could go to his wake, so I managed to do that. And so anyway, that occurred just before I went down to Fort Gordon. And,
You had left a tribute to him. You wrote a tribute to him online. I thought I had it. I thought it would be in here, but I don't see it. Well, if we find it, we'll read it later.
Okay. That was
There's another picture.
there was a person who was putting this together, and he was had left out Dudley, and I'd worked with the man to get Dudley included, so the people like Norman would be included in his project. It may say so right on there. Stephen Judicki, I think was the man's name.
I don't know.
It's been a while now. Actually, I contacted him when we did the 50th, my high school did their 50th reunion, and which was in 2014. And I contacted him again and said, hey, just to let you know, we're doing our 50th reunion, and there'll be a memory board up there for people who from the class who were deceased. And of course, Norman was the first one from the class. That's fine.
I'll let you have that if you want.
And getting back to Fort Gordon, I came back and finished the course, and I received my orders, and I remember you have to read the bulletin board. Again, there was no computers, and we didn't have Xerox machines and things, so things were typed up and they were posted on your bulletin board. And as a soldier, you were required to read your bulletin board twice a day.
Really?
And, oh yes, yeah, you had to go read it twice a day. And that's where duty assignments for even things like KP or guard duty were posted, or if you had other duties, that type of thing. But it's also where they posted your assignments when they came in, not the orders themselves, but the assignments. So my assignment came in, and it was for the 1st Cav Division in Vietnam. I said, ooh, okay, so this is real, it's going to happen. Well, I'm waiting for orders, and no orders are coming, and I made an inquiry at my company, and I was told, well, you're not going to get any orders because you don't have any records. So it goes back to the theater where they lost my records. And so our company clerk was this guy from Chicago, Soika, I think his name was, and he says, oh, yeah, I said, you're pretty lucky. You'd be just like me. He says, I've been here my whole tour. And he was a draftee too, and he was a company clerk. And I said, whoa. You didn't go anywhere except Fort Gordon, Georgia? He said, no. He said, this is great. Spent my whole time right here. I didn't have to go to Vietnam or, that kind of thing. And I'm thinking to myself, that is not what I want. I want to explore the world. And Fort Dix was okay, and Fort Gordon is okay, but there's got to be more to the world than, these places. So the commander, Captain Van Mill, had open door policy. So I went in on his open door policy, and I said, I have orders for Vietnam, but I can't go. I want to go. And he took me in his car, his personal car, and he drove me around Fort Gordon to the various places we needed to go to create records. Took me over to the personnel office. We went to the hospital, dental, every place we had to go, finance. And he did it on his own time. In his car, and we put together records, and they were sufficient enough that I missed my first assignment, and
with the 1st Cav?
with the Cav, my first assignment, again, I couldn't make it because I had no orders, but lo and behold, I came down with the same assignment.
Oh, okay.
To the 1st Cav. So I had orders now, and I left Fort Gordon in February. And there were so many people coming through. They were running, the schools, for example, were running day and night sessions. So I was a day student.
Wow.
People came down and they were night students. So they would start whenever, maybe 4 in the afternoon and go till midnight or something like that. There were so many soldiers there that once you had your orders and you were out processed, you couldn't even stay in your company. They moved you out to a holding area, and the holding area was a tent. Or tents, a series of tents. It wasn't one, it was a series of tents. And it was cold, and Georgia, of course, can get really cold in the wintertime, get damp and what have you. And we had this little potbelly stove, and the stove wasn't generating any heat. And I can remember that there was so little heat coming out of it that somebody was actually standing on it on top of the stove trying to get warm, and even that wouldn't do it. And anyway, I processed out of there, and I don't know if it was because of that or whatever, but I remember I caught a plane this time. I flew Space A. You could fly Space A for half price. You'd sign up, and if they had an empty seat, they'd let you fly for half price. So that was pretty good. I caught a flight up into Carolinas, and I think it was North Carolina, and I still remember sitting there. I think it was Raleigh Airport, and the wind was blowing through, and I was cold and sick and miserable. And then finally caught a flight up to Massachusetts that got home, and I think I spent the first 3 or 4 days at home on leave, sick. It's just miserable. But anyway, so I spent my time at home and left, and went to, we processed out of Oakland, California, Oakland Army Base. Huge building, and nothing but just bunks. There were no rooms. It was like a warehouse. I think that's pretty much what it was a warehouse. And had a large shower facility, and the one thing that I really do remember was that you had a whole row of pay telephones up there that were constantly in use, and because we were there, we were held there, and they were only holding us until they could manifest us on a plane to get us to Vietnam. And I don't know, there was a couple hundred people in there, or 300, I don't know, whatever it was, but it was huge, and just, again, there was nothing but bunk. You had bunks and duffel bags, that was it. And everybody was sitting around waiting. And so I finally got manifested out, and we went, I don't even know where, it was 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning or something, I don't know, whatever time it was. It was certainly the middle of the night. And it may have been Travis Air Force Base, I'm not quite sure. They didn't even tell us. It just said, okay, you guys have manifested, let's go on the bus. And I guess at that point it really didn't make any difference. But we got on the plane, and it was a big 707 commercial aircraft, and the first place we flew to was Hawaii. And I'm thinking, whoa, this is great, going to Hawaii. You get to Hawaii in the middle of the night, 2, 3, 4, or whatever it was in the morning, and everything is closed. You can't go anywhere. They let us off the plane, but you're confined into that little area of the terminal. So I'm thinking, oh, this is great. I'm experiencing Hawaii, but it's dark, and all I'm seeing is the building of the airport. So we get back on the plane, and of course it's 3 and 3 seating, and the plane's packed. It's every seat's taken. Next stop is Wake Island, and now it's daytime, and you look down, and here's this little tiny island that is so small, it's like a horseshoe, and one side of the horseshoe is a runway. There's not much there. So we get off the plane, they refuel it, we get back on the plane, and then the next stop was the Philippines. And so, oh boy, this is another place I've never been, and there it was daytime too. And so we got out, and we roaming around the terminal and things like that, and they actually let us go, and just be back here. Your flight is going to leave at 2 or whatever time it was, that type of thing. So we get back, and they make the announcement, and they say, we're proud or happy to announce the continuation of flight such and such to Pleiku, Vietnam. Most people came in down at Saigon, Long Binh, or up at Cam Ranh is where you normally came in, but we were all going to the first cab, so we came in at Pleiku. And so anyway, they make the announcement in the Philippines. We walk out the door, and there is no gleaming 707 anymore. It is a camouflage C-130. And I've never been on board a military aircraft in my life. I go on board this thing, and they're canvas seats, and they're all facing to the rear. And there are no frills. I mean, this was it. So we all get in there, we take our seats, and the funny part of all of this was all of the previous flights, the one to Hawaii, the one to Wake, the one to the Philippines, everybody was laughing and joking and what have you. When that plane took off, you could have heard a pin drop except for the drone of the aircraft. No one was joking around anymore. Everything was quiet. And so anyway, we came into Pleiku, and the pilot said, well, they're probing the runway, so we're going to, tighten up your seatbelts. We're going to make a steep approach, and which he did. It was, down we came, and Supposedly, they were taking some, had some activity outside of the airfield. And I still remember this, the plane landed, it taxied, they dropped the tailgate on the back of it. It was military aircraft, you do that. And the heat just came rushing in. And you could see there were some guys running along the flight line. And I don't know if they were running to man positions or whatever, but it was probably the only time when I was over there where I really doubted whether I was going to come home. And which, excuse me, which was ironic because it was my first moment there. But I remember thinking, if the enemy doesn't kill me, the heat will.
Was that bad?
It was March, but it was hot and humid, and I'm raised in Massachusetts and what have you, and you're just not used to that. And I had just left. Actually, it was snowing, in New England at that when I left, getting ready to go over there. But yeah, I did have that thought. And anyway, we get to Pleiku, and it's a big replacement depot. And I should look her up on the internet, but I remember they had a little press tent, and there was a female French journalist there who had been captured by the Viet Cong, and they had just released her, and she was there. And that was big news back then. I was reading about this while I was home on leave. Where was this female French journalist? Was she safe? Were they going to kill her? Whatever. But they actually released her.
How long did they hold her, do you know?
I would guess about a month. So I should go back and look it up, because all the details are all vague now. It's been so many years. I used to know her name. Now I've forgotten that now. But yeah, she was there. But anyway, it was a replacement depot, and the first night there, I remember laying in a bunk, and it was that open bay kind of thing, and there was artillery fire, and there were flares, and you have the realization, it's that thing of you're not in Kansas anymore. Excuse me, I have there's flares and artillery fire and what have you. And anyway, I'm laying there in my bunk, and I'm thinking, gee, I need to get up and go, take a leak, urinate. And on one hand you want to, and on the other, I don't want to get out of bed and disturb everybody and what have you. But then finally say, go ahead and go out there. So they have I walked out, and the place where you went to urinate was what we refer to as a piss tube. You probably heard the expression. And they literally sink a pipe into the ground. I'm sure they dig a hole and probably put rocks in there and what have you. So you don't have to go to an outhouse. They'll put up a piece of canvas around it, so you're going to have a little bit of privacy. So I went out there, and here was half a dozen other guys, and I looked and I kind of smiled, and I said, I guess you guys couldn't sleep either. And they said, nah, so people were standing there just kind of, as they would say, smoking and joking, that kind of thing. But I remember that quite well. That was the first night there. Mm-hmm. And we're only there for a couple of days. And then we went, it was really strange. We flew, they changed my assignment, said, no, you're not going to the first cab to be a radio operator. We are going to reassign you to the 48th Assault Helicopter Company, which was part of the 1st Aviation Brigade. And it's okay, I have my orders. And the first plane out was a plane, we flew into Ankei, and we got a flat tire. And the strip appeared to be out in the middle of nowhere. I'd never been back to Ankei after that, but it was so strange. We sat there because we had to wait for them to fly in another tire.
Can you spell Ankei?
Oh, A-N-K-H-E. And so anyway,
and what was happening at Ankei?
Well, it was. I think it was like a milk run. They were just dropping people off, picking people up, that kind of thing. But it was so strange. I remember being there, and you just looked around, and there was jungle over on the other side, and there was one little building where we were. Maybe we were at the end of the runway or something, but I couldn't see a base. It had to be there, but I really couldn't see anything. And the other strange thing that happened was that here these two guys, and I remember, one was white, one was black. They're special forces guys, and they came walking out of the other side of the runway, over towards where the jungle was, and they just walked through, and they sat down at that building, which was kind of like an ops building type thing, but there's only a couple people around. They stood there and they took a break and they talked a little bit and what have you, and then they grabbed their gear and kept walking the other way, out the other side. It was strange. And this is all so new, and you're looking, what the heck is going on here, that kind of thing. But anyway, we got out of there, and we flew. My next stop after that was in the train, which was where our group headquarters was located. Spent a couple of days there, and it was just processing. That's all they were doing, was processing your records, finance, all this other stuff. Then the next stop was down a little place called Dong Batin, DBT, which was right across from Cameron Bay.
Could you spell that?
DONGBA, and I think it's THIN, Dong Batin. And so anyway, that was battalion, and they kept me there for a while. And what they were trying to do, they actually, it's amazing, it's the Army, but they were asking me, one of the NCOs there, they had me working, put me out to work in this little shack at the end of the runway, and you were doing phone patches. So if you had a person on the radio calling someone on say a field phone, and it was hooked into, you were hooked into it, and the person on one end would talk, and then he would say over, and you would flip the switch, and then the other guy would talk, and then he'd say over, and then you'd flip the switch. And so they had asked me if I wanted to stay there and work there at the battalion instead of going to my company. And after looking and experiencing that, I said, ooh, you have got to be kidding me. This is the last thing I want to do is sit here every day and go over, flip the switch. It was probably, safe duty, but so boring. I mean, who'd want to do that? So, or I didn't want to do that. So anyway, what I did was, I told them I really wasn't interested, and just to kind of put the icing on the cake, I screwed up a couple of those conversations on purpose, and so they wouldn't really want me, that kind of thing. So that was good. They moved me out, and I reported to my company. But anyway, I made it to the 48th Assault Helicopter Company. They were at Phan Rang at that time. They had we were sharing the camp with the 101st Airborne, 1st Brigade of the 101st Airborne was there. There was some Australian Air Force was there, the United States Air Force. Ironically, one of the guys in my company who was a specialist Spec 4, Hal Lehman, his father was a pilot for the Air Force, and he was stationed. I'm sure that's how he got into that unit. His dad probably pulled a string or two to get him assigned to that company, but his dad was flying B-57 Canberras out of Phan Rang Air Base. So, anyway, we were there for about 3 months or so, and then we moved up to a place called Ninh Hoa, which was north of Nha Trang. I think Nha Trang was the second largest city in South Vietnam, and not too far off the coast, a couple miles off the coast, and just to the west of Highway 1. And I stayed there for the remainder of the last 9 months, and that was we were on the base camp of the 9th Korean Division, the ROK's, Republic of Korea. So it was the 9th ROK Infantry Division, and that was their headquarters. It was the White Horse Division. And there was only 2 American units on that base, our company, the 48th, and the other one was a small engineering company. And unbeknownst to me, I didn't find out until I got back home, a person I went to high school with was in that engineering company. We overlapped for 2 or 3 months. I could have walked over and had seen him had I known he was there, but we really had no interface with those people at all. They had their mission, we had ours. And,
it's a small world.
Very small world. But,
did you have any mortar attacks there?
Yeah, they had a number of those. The worst one, fortunately, a couple of times they tried to hit the flight line, they missed, but one of them it overshot our choppers and landed on a Korean barracks and killed about 8 of them. Eight Koreans were killed in that one. But there were rockets, there were mortars, and one time, this was very unfortunate, we actually ended up killing a Korean. They had beyond, I mentioned we were just to the west of Highway 1, and on the east side of Highway 1 was this big, we called it Big Charlie. It was a peninsula, a singular mountain that ran into the sea, and the VC would like to, try to get in there and what have you. And this one time, somebody came out of there and threw some mortars at us, and we put up a lot of flares, and anything on the east side of that highway was no man's land, so to speak, free fire zone. And so unfortunately the Koreans, I guess, had seen the flash from the mortar tube when these guys were popping off a couple of mortars, and they ran over the other side of the road. And when the flares went off, our people spotted men over on the other side of the road and opened fire, and unbeknownst to us, they were Koreans. So, and unfortunately, they killed one of them. But it's one of those things when they say don't go there. There's a reason why they don't want you to go there.
Was there any kind of language miscommunications going on with Americans and Koreans?
All that was fairly well coordinated. The Koreans were fairly good soldiers, but they, a lot of people, you get these myths that grow up around people, and they were much different soldiers than we were. They would actually they would stand there and disobey an order. For example, we would transport them, whether it was on a combat mission or an administrative mission. But on these administrative missions, a lot of times they have to go from from a battalion back down to division headquarters or something, and we'd pull in, land the chopper, and say, okay, we can take 5 people. Well, and we'd tell you it was Captain Park or Captain Kim or something that would be there, and say we can take 5, and invariably 10 of them would jump on, and so he'd start throwing them off, and he'd say, you, get off, and the guy might be a PFC or a corporal, and he'd tell him no. Of course, the American Army, you'd never do that,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but the Koreans, no. So what they would do, they would resort to physical violence, and or he'd Captain Kim might grab their steel pot and wing it, throw it, and so once they got off the helicopter, he wouldn't let them back on. It got to be like a free-for-all sometimes. When these things take place.
That's interesting.
But, yeah, like I said, the discipline was a little different. The thing with working with the Koreans, like I say, they were good soldiers. But I do recall going into a combat assaults with Koreans, and a couple of times I had to literally throw them off the helicopter because they wouldn't get off. It happened twice, and
They didn't want to fight?
Yeah, they were afraid.
Oh, okay.
Didn't want to get off. So
How well trained were they?
they were pretty good army. Yeah, they were well trained. But the thing about them being supermen or something was not really true. They were good soldiers. It seemed, in my opinion, and again, it's only my opinion, it seemed that the Americans were better at the full scale, the big assaults, things like that. The Koreans seemed to be more comfortable with the smaller unit tactics, that kind of thing. Again, that's my opinion. But the little different thing with the culture with Koreans, I remember one time we came back, it was, we were flying local resupply. The Koreans would be up on these hilltops so that they could keep Highway 1 open, and there were no roads up on these hilltops. They had to fly in their food, their water, ammunition, whatever they needed. And so we were doing that in the local area. We were flying out to these hilltops and resupplying them, and then we came back for lunch. After lunch, my crew chief, Bob McFadden, he and I go back to our helicopter, and we hear this boom. It's kind of a double explosion. What the heck was that? And shortly thereafter, here come our pilots, and they are complaining and swearing and what have you. And what had happened was this one Korean had been convicted of stealing from his other Koreans, his compadres. and he had been court-martialed, and he was going to be sent back to Korea, and he was going to go to jail, in the military prison. And they were right next to our compound, just to the north of us, where it was a Korean MP compound, part of the 9th Rock Division. It was their MPs, and that prisoner was held there. I think what they conveniently let him find a couple of grenades. Anyway, the guy blew himself up. He was not going home in disgrace, was the point. And the reason our pilots were complaining was because bits and pieces of this guy went. It was right across the fence line. They just blew stuff onto their tent and their laundry. You hang your laundry out there, what have you. But the cultural thing. He was not going to go home in disgrace, so he blew himself up.
I didn't know they felt the same way as the Japanese in World War II.
More of an Asian thing, but he was not.
You mentioned Bob McFadden. I wanted to show the picture.
Yeah, that's Bob.
Here's John.
Bob was the crew chief, a very good crew chief, and I was the door gunner. He and I flew together for a long time.
We'll show the picture of the helicopter.
Yeah, that helicopter is loaded with flares, and you load 20 on a side, and for example, like I mentioned, a mortar attack, when flares went all the way, the flares went off as you sent a helicopter up, and it would be a two-man operation, and depending upon which side we were doing it, we would take a big screwdriver and put it, there's a cable in a ring, and you'd put it through the ring, and the other person, whether it was Bob or myself, one guy would hold the ring and the other guy would throw it, and as we flew along, the pilots would tell us when to throw. So they're looking and tracking the flares, and we're just we're doing this on our knees. One guy would be right there in the center where the rings were and what have you, and the other guy would be tossing them out. And you throw them, and the pin went off, and then the parachute came out, and the flares went off.
So the helicopter was a Huey.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't have a picture.
Yeah, UH-1, actually, a UH-1D. We had the old D models. They upgraded later on. We eventually got what was called H models, which were more powerful engines, bigger, etc. I was actually on the only time I went AWOL in Vietnam. I was on a helicopter. It was kind of like a reward. We were picking up our first H model, so the commander sent it was 3 lieutenants and a warrant officer and myself and a couple of maintenance guys to go down and pick up this brand new H model. And I went down as the gunner, but there was no real gun mission. It was kind of like, here, you've done a pretty good job. There's a little break for you. So I was an E4 Spec 4 at the time, and I could hear the pilots chit-chatting amongst themselves. I didn't know what was going on, but we go down to Long Binh to pick up this helicopter, which is down by Saigon. We're up in Tu Quoc, and Saigon's a ways down south. And what they had decided to do when they got the brand new helicopter was, instead of flying straight back the way they were supposed to, they flew to a place called Vung Ro. And I'm sorry, Vung Tau. Vung Ro is north of us, Vung Tau. And Vung Tau was the in-country R&R place in South Vietnam. It was probably the safest place you could be in South Vietnam, and it had hotels and what have you. And so we flew in, parked the helicopters, got a hotel room, and luckily I had some money. I had no idea this was going to happen. And ate at a restaurant that night and what have you. So it was nice. It was a nice break. And we flew the helicopter back the next morning. And for us unlisted people, nothing was ever said. But the commander called in the 3 lieutenants, and you could hear everything that went on there. There was no privacy, because tents and screens. There were no windows or doors to speak of, and things like that. And he laid into them and told them it would be the last time they would go anywhere together, and et cetera, because they were supposed to come right back. So
how large was the company? With them gone, how many people were left to do the job that they did?
I'm sorry, how many?
With them gone to the hotel, whatever, how many people were left who would have who would do that type of job that they did?
Oh, no, it was a large company, you know, and there was probably 250, 300 people there. We had detachments, maintenance detachment. We had our own doctor and medics and that type of thing. So POL people, petroleum, oil lubricants, that pretty self-sustaining unit. So, you know, there were a lot of people, but the fact of the matter was they were supposed to go straight down and get the hell over and come straight back and not go somewhere else. So anyway, that's one of the things that happened while we were flying. A couple of other things. Up north of us, there was a place called Phu Hep, just south of Tuiwa, and it was kind of desolate, barren, just below the airstrip, and it bordered the South China Sea, and we used to fly up there all the time, and there would be nothing there. And I remember we flew up one day, there was nothing there, and we were getting ready to do a big operation, and I flew up the next day, and the place was full of shelter halves, little pup tents, and the whole area was covered, and it was the 173rd Airborne Brigade. They had flown them up, and that's where they had set up. And there was, I don't know how many soldiers out there skinny dipping in the South China Sea, you know, they're taking a break and cleaning their equipment and what have you, because I think it was 2 days later we went in, I believe it was called Operation Bowling. It was a huge, huge air mobile assault up into the mountains up around Tuiwa. So actually the first cav came in, 173rd Airborne, came up in the mountains, and then they ran the Koreans up the valley. A huge operation. You got loads and loads of prisoners, captured weapons, etc. It was quite an operation.
So the 48th got a change in aircraft authorization in February. 23 lift ships were called Slicks.
Slicks, right.
And 8 gunships.
Correct.
And I found what you had just mentioned earlier about the Koreans were affected but not the Americans. In October, Ninhua was mortared for the first time.
Yeah, October was, they took advantage, I don't know if it was accidental, coincidental, or whatever, but we had sent some birds up to Fubai up north to work them. They were supporting someone else up there. It may have even been the Marines, I'm not sure. I didn't go. So we had one platoon up there and some of our gunships, and then we got mortared, and then there was a huge firefight. Battle went on for a couple of days, 3 days, and where the Koreans pushed them back, what have you. And there's a number of things that happened during that. Again, you know, not again, but I remember it quite well. And the town, it was through the town of Ninhua, and the townspeople had fled, if you will, fled the town, and right outside town there was this hill, and I'll never forget this. It was these ironic things that happened. You had all these people on the hillside, and we're flying right in on Highway 1. There was a soccer field over there, and as we flew in, I'm looking at this old Vietnamese guy who was literally out in this field, kind of plain view of the world, defecating, and he looked right at me. I mean, we just made eye contact, and the guy had probably lived through World War II and the French and what have you, and he had that look on his face like, you know, nothing ever changes. You know, I've seen this all before. I still remember that.
Wow.
And the other thing I remember was that there was a couple of people who were dead, who were killed, got caught in a crossfire or something, and we had flown over them for a couple of days, and everybody kept saying, "Yeah, I wonder who's going to pick up those bodies." And we got a mission. A couple of Koreans hopped on board with body bags, and you know, and I remember we went and picked them up. They were already starting to really smell kind of bad. I recall that. Again, you know, flying in right there into the soccer field, that type of thing. Highway 1, the soccer field. A lot of fighting going on. It was a significant event happened to us. Bob and myself and a guy named John Taylor and Smith. I forgot his first name now, but we were flying in that area. We're bringing in a lot of ammo, what have you, and taking out wounded and things. And so we got one call earlier today. It was a medevac call. There was no medevac in the area at the time, so we went in and we took some wounded Koreans out. And it was late in the day. It was getting fairly well towards the end of the lighted period of the day. And we were refueling. We got a call, and there was another call for wounded Koreans, take some wounded Koreans out in the same area. And this time there was a medevac helicopter available, but medevac they were up there flying around, and they claimed they couldn't, not claim, they couldn't find the place where it was. And again, there's houses around and trees and what have you. So anyway, we got the call, and they said, medevac can't find it. You guys, you've been there before. You want to go in and take it? And the pilots called back and says, hey, you guys, you want to go in and do this? Yeah, sure, we'll go ahead and do that. So anyway, we went in, and we're approaching it, and it was a tight place to fly into, and we had to slow down significantly, which I think is probably what saved our lives, because as we were coming in to get the wounded, all of a sudden we were fired at, and the Korean ground estimate, they figured 25 to 30 automatic weapons, were firing at us. And we got the helicopter got hit, and the pilot right in front of me got shot through the leg, and the Taylor, who was the aircraft commander, started yelling, Mayday, Mayday, this is Blue Star 904, and that type of thing. And the crew chief, Bob, he ran up to he assisted the pilot with first aid kit, put something on his leg. Taylor is flying the helicopter. I returned fire. Candidly, I couldn't really see them, but I returned fire where I thought they were coming from. And the crazy thing is, I remember this. I still laugh, thinking about it. My God, Maydays are real. You think it's only something you see in the movies,
Mm-hmm.
but or hear in the movies as they really do exist.
Mm-hmm.
We made it back safely in the camp, and where I sat, this after we flew past all of this, and most of it came up in front of me. That's why I say thank God we were going slow.
Oh,
because
I see. Right.
Yeah, most of it came up in front of us, but the pilot did get it, and the helicopter got hit in more places. I sat right here, and there was a wall right there, and the fuel tanks are right there. Well, we got hit in the fuel tanks, which means, these 2 feet or maybe less, the rounds were right next to my seat. We got hit in the tail boom and what have you. And the helicopter was vibrating kind of violently because we caught it right through the drive shaft, drivetrain. And but the one thing, ironically, we never checked. I don't think was the fuel. And I remember Taylor, telling me. Check the transmission, what have you. I could turn around. There was a little round window. You push a button, the light came on. You could see the transmission, the engine compartment, that kind of thing. And he was asking me to look for leaks, hydraulic leaks and things of that nature. And I remember doing that, and nothing was there. Mm-hmm. No leaks. But the one thing apparently. Again, we hadn't checked was the fuel, and in spite of the fact that we had just refueled not too long ago, as we came in, it's actually a lot of people were standing there, they were watching us. It's almost dusk now, and we're coming in, and my one buddy, he said, God, it looked like somebody had a fire hose, and it was or a garden hose rather, all your fuel was leaking out of the chopper, and didn't even know it. So we land right there on the flight line, and got the wounded pilot to the medics, and ironically, the medevac took him to the hospital. But so I pull out my guns. I'm just kind of okay. Little time to get the guns off and what have you. When somebody goes yelling, "Get out of there! Get out of there!" Because the fuel was still coming out.
Wow.
I didn't even realize we were losing the fuel. There wasn't much left. Most of it. So anyway, that was that. October 67.
So that was a rare mission for you?
No, getting shot at was not routine, if you will. But we were shot at a few times before, but we never got hit like that. That was...
Was that a trap?
No, it was
Oh,
just,
okay.
uh,
I thought I read about that mission, but I can't
yeah.
find it.
I don't know if you call it a trap. They had seen us come in earlier, and we were coming back into the same location, and so I think they just took advantage of it.
Oh, that makes
I mean,
sense,
they
yeah.
didn't lay the trap, but they took advantage of the situation. But then it didn't take very long, and then they were completely, moved out of the area. We defeated them, and off they went. So it kind of brings to mind Tet of '68, and where people said, "Oh, Tet of '68, that was an American military defeat," and the fact of the matter was that it's exactly the opposite was true. It was a major American victory, major. And what they had done was, of course, they had rocketed and mortared, with a coordinated effort up and down the coast. But once that occurred, we beat them back, and we literally destroyed the Viet Cong. And there were no gains. They didn't make any gains or anything out of that, except for people like Walter Cronkite, who wailed and bemoaned the fact that we were attacked and what have you. What was supposed to happen was that the South Vietnamese were supposed to rise up and join the Viet Cong, and they were going to throw the Americans out of the country and all that kind of stuff. Well, none of that happened. The South Vietnamese didn't do that. I think they pretty well told the Viet Cong, you're on your own. And from Tet of '68 onward, we never really fought the Viet Cong per se. What we were fighting from '68 onward was a very well equipped, very well trained North Vietnamese army, not the Viet Cong. So anyway,
That's interesting.
and it's factual. I mean, what I'm saying is factual. You can look it all up. But the back in the States with the anti-war movement, and I mentioned Walter Cronkite because he was the one who made that comment on national TV about we'll never be able to win this war, something like that. And Walter Cronkite was a very, very well-respected newscaster who grew up through World War II, and people had been watching him. Everybody watched Walter Cronkite, I think it was CBS News or something. I remember, seeing him.
Was he on, radio before there was TV?
Probably, but he was a journalist, but he was really, really popular. Extremely popular, and most people knew or watched Walter Cronkite. And he made that comment, and it was kind of a killer comment, if you will, but it was incorrect. It was inaccurate. I remember Tet of '68 quite well. We had piles and piles of captured weapons. We had so many prisoners of war that we were in the 9th ROK Division, the Koreans could not handle them all. We're flying them up to Quy Nhon, to the Tiger Division, so they could interrogate some of them, that type of thing. And that one's always, I'm sure you can tell, that's always bothered me, the fact that it is, I read something about it once, something about one of the biggest lies, of history, if you will, that this was an American defeat, when in actuality it was American victory. So it's, as they say, go figure.
Yeah, I only have my veterans who tell me that.
Yeah,
Right.
because we know.
But it was a war that was fought on TV as well.
Yes,
For the first time.
Yes, right. You had a lot of anti-war sentiment, you had a lot of anti-war press, and you had Life magazine or Look magazine publishing the photos of the dead soldiers every week, that kind of, and it was kind of unfair in a way, if you know what I mean. But it was they politicized it, and they used as they say, the power of the press, that type of thing, and that's why you see guys walking around with T-shirts that say Vietnam, we were winning when I left, that kind of thing. But
I never heard of that. That's
oh, you
cute.
no, I mean it was actually true in a lot of ways. It depends when you were there, but if you look at it historically, the Army, the American military, we were attacked. There were, we suffered our casualties, but we never lost it anywhere. Every time we engaged them in battle, we won. So
Those are the exact words I had a veteran tell me.
Yeah,
so many years ago.
Yeah. So how do you lose? Every time you turn around, you won an engagement. They would flee from us, that type of thing, and we were unfortunately the ones, with our hands tied behind our back, and we had no-fly zones, and all this other stuff. So absolutely insane.
Did you feel like you were part of a well-organized effort as far as getting resupplied and things like that?
Oh yes, yeah. It was. I was amazed at how well they could do it. We had our supply point was Cameron Bay, and it was a huge depot. There were things that occasionally you didn't get, and but of course, if you look at it through today's eyes, today is unbelievable the way they can resupply and what have you. But Vietnam, I would say, you were closer to Korea in World War II than the fights that you have today, with Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever. I looked at Desert Storm when I was in Desert Storm, and I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe this! The way this stuff is coming in, and anything from fuel to clothing to food. I mean, it was just amazing, how we got materials over there." But in Vietnam, when I first got there, actually, we had a little hard time getting jungle fatigues and what have you. But then that seemed to, they opened up that. And one of the problems was that if you got, for example, an infantry unit, the division would take care of all of the subordinate units within the division. But we would go to a supply point like Cameron, and we were getting our supplies as a company. So you didn't have the headquarters making sure, that. So, but we had some pretty good supply people, and a couple of them who were just out and out thieves, and I know we got some things that we probably weren't supposed to have, or that kind of thing. But they took care of us. And,
that's good.
Food, we got some fresh food, not a lot. A lot of what we ate, most of what we ate was canned, even the bee rations, the big cans, or dehydrated meats. I don't know if you ever saw those, like dehydrated pork chops. Mm-hmm. You open up a can and you got to throw them in water and let them soak for about 6 hours so they absorb the water again. You get stuff like that. But they try to bring in some fresh produce. I don't recall a lot of fruit, to be honest with you. But nobody ever went hungry, and of course there were sea rations. We did eat when we were on flare duty and things like that. We ate a lot of sea rations. Back at base camp we didn't, but when I showed the picture with the flares, we had these little places where it was just our helicopter and what we call the hooch, and the crew would sleep there. The pilots and the Dorga, myself, and the crew chief would sleep there, and what you ate was sea rations.
Where was that? Just like in the middle of nowhere?
No, it was like, for example, if it was kind of on the south part of the base. You'd fuel up and you'd move off the flight line, the active flight line, and they had that little hooch built specifically for that, and then if something happened, you got the call. And I guess maybe some of the rationale was, for example, if the flight line was being mortared or something like that, they wanted the flare helicopter to be separate from the flight line. So we had places like that. Now, back at Ninh Hoa, where our base camp was, if you had flare duty, there was you weren't that far removed, but you were on the other side of the flight line. They had a special spot for the flare ship.
So in November of '67, the rest of the rear support elements of the 48th moved to Ninh Hoa from Phan Rang.
Mm-hmm.
And flyable aircraft moved to Pleiku because the typhoon was going to hit.
Oh yeah, but that was in October. Those pictures I had of all of our tents. We had in Phan Rang we had semi-permanent structures, but when everybody moved up to Ninh Hoa, there was just a handful of what you'd call semi-permanent structures. We lived in what were called GP large tents, general purpose large. They put down a wooden floor. And so you had that, and they would put up the tent, and they put a wooden frame on the inside of the tent to make it a little more sturdy. And they ran a 2-string wire through there and put 2 or 3 lights So at night you could have some lights.
And that's exactly what was wiped out, the tents, the frames.
Yeah, the tents, yeah, they were.
The equipment and the personal belongings.
Yes, oh yeah. It was just about everything you had was soaked, you know, it came through. They flew off the helicopters, but didn't even take, like myself, a door gunner, didn't even take the door gunners. They just flew the helicopters off the crew chiefs up to Pleiku, keep them safe. And then we stayed back there because they knew the place was going to be a mess, and it was. I mean, they just wiped out everything. So we went over to that engineer company I mentioned earlier and stayed over there until it passed. It hit early in the morning. So by about mid-morning, we were out of there. And they brought in a Chinook with an emergency requisition of new tents, and we put up new tents right away. And guys had stuff everywhere trying to dry it out, you know, your clothes. And people had electronic gear. Back then, the big thing was reel-to-reel tape recorders. Mm-hmm. So even in these tents, you know, you walk in, the guy would have a tape recorder there to play his music. And a lot of that stuff got ruined. But yeah, so it happens. But you know, say my stuff got all soaked, but it was okay. Just dry it out.
Oh, okay. Do you know what jokers meant? Jokers?
The jokers were our gunships, and the lift aircraft, the utilities, we call them slicks. Okay, so we had three platoons of aircraft. We had 2 platoons of slicks, which were the lift utility resupply aircraft, and the jokers were the gunships. And the gunships had flexible machine guns on them, or they could fire rockets. And we had one that fired cannons, 40-millimeter cannons.
What kind of gun did you fire?
M60 machine gun. Okay, and these, so the slicks, we would do what they call hash and trash and what have you, the resupply. So we would bring in, as I mentioned before, water, food, ammunition, mail, you know, whatever they needed. And also, when you did a combat assault and you brought the soldiers in, you see the soldiers jumping off the helicopters, that's the kind that they were on. The gunships were the ones that were the lethal, really lethal birds, and they'd be up there flying cover, or they may go in prep an area beforehand. But they would have, it depended, there were different, we built different versions of them. And they had one they called the Frog, which had a bubble on the front, and it had that 40-millimeter cannon. And we had some that had, they were flex guns, they were machine guns. There was 2 on each side, and those were operated by the pilot. So he could maneuver the guns, and he fired those. Plus you had a crew chief and door gunner who had a free M60. So you actually had 6 machine guns and whatever else they had. A lot of those would be, it'd be the 4 machine guns, the flex guns, and they would have rocket pods of 7 on the side. So you carried 14 rockets plus the machine guns. Then there was another variation. We had one that they called the Hog, which didn't have the flex guns, but it had 48 rockets. Big rectangular pod, and it was 24. So you flew in and you could fire 24 rockets, and plus you had the gunner and the crew chief. Then later on, they were using these other rocket pods, which had 19 on the side. They were round, and you could get 19 rockets. When they got what was it? C model. I guess it was the C model had those. It had the 38 rockets. So there were different variations, but the gunships were the jokers. And we had some nose art, and every gunship had some variation of the Joker face.
Oh,
remember,
okay.
like Batman?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they had the Joker face was on that.
That was a TV show back then, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was. And my platoon was the first platoon, and our little logo was Snoopy.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and then second platoon had the Deuce, you know, the Wild Deuce, that kind of thing. But each platoon had their little logo and their little nose art. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we had Snoopy.
And the Hangar Rats?
That was the maintenance guys. We had 48th had a maintenance detachment that was in augmentation to us, if you will, and that was the 390th maintenance detachment. So those were the guys. So I mean, they called it a hangar, but we had it was more of a canvas in metal frame structure, big round thing. Actually, one of them got wiped out during the hurricane. So.
Well, the Hangar Rats got the Best Maintenance Award, Outstanding Achievement, High Degree of Professional Knowledge and Devotion to Duty.
Yeah. There was we had a good company, and that includes all of the augmentation. You know, whether it was the 268th Med or the 390th, and then I think later on, I believe it was after I left, they even got some commo people that were assigned to them.
So while you were flying all through Vietnam, nothing ever went wrong with your aircraft as far as like a leak, not having to do with gunfire?
No, one time we were. It was kind of funny. I'm laughing because my crew chief Bob was really good, and we were flying along, and we were north of the city of Tuiwa, and Bob said, "God, I swear I hear something. I swear there's something. I can hear something." So we went to this. It was a Korean outpost. It's again kind of up on a hill. And he said, I got to check this when we land. So we went there, and if you pull the oil plugs, they have magnets on them. So if there's any metal filings or what have you, the magnet will pick them up, and you pull the plug, and sure enough, our oil pump was grinding up. So we did what they call a red X. You take your logbook, and you red X, it means it's grounded, can't move it. And so we're on this Korean compound, and we can't go anywhere. We call back to our base camp and he tells them what we need. They're going to send a maintenance team up to make the repair, bring the part and make the repair. And unfortunately, they got about halfway up, and the monsoons came in. And so we were stuck for the night. So we ended up sleeping on a piece of plywood in this Korean hooch. But the funny thing was we had gotten some of that weather, and there was a lot of mud and what have you in the helicopter. So we ate Korean food, Korean mess hall. We ate the food, and then Bob and I said, let's just go down and clean up the helicopter. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, nothing to do, that type of thing. So we go down to the helicopter, and we're cleaning it, and all of a sudden, here's 3 or 4 Koreans, and they have a case of beer, and it was Crown beer. I don't know if they still make that or not, but I remember it was Crown. And one of the pilots, one of the Koreans rather, not pilot, one of the Koreans spoke very good English. He was a school teacher, and I think he'd been to school in the States too. And so they hopped inside the chopper, and we were sitting there, and we drank the whole case of beer. And we came back, and our pilots were upset with us that we didn't get them.
Was it warm?
Yeah, the beer was warm, but we drank it anyway. And they brought down, you know what cuttlefish is? Dried squid?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they brought down some dried squid, so we sat around.
Like squid jerky?
Yeah, like squid jerky. So the very few times in Vietnam did we ever drink a lot, because you're on standby duty and things like that. But anyway, that night though we couldn't go anywhere anyway. So we ended up, all of us, we drank the case of beer and ate the dried squid. It was and then they showed up the next morning. The skies cleared, and the maintenance crew showed up, changed the oil pump, and off we went, and fly our missions. So that was the only time that we ever had a maintenance breakdown. Other people may have, I'm sure, we had a lot of helicopters.
But other than that, you were confident in your maintenance?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the guys were great. They really were. And any damage, like that time we got shot up, they patched it all up. We had sheet metal guys, they'd replaced parts, but they'd actually fixed the skin, that kind of thing. Sheet metal people. So yeah, they were very good.
So after you left, they moved out of the tents into new quarters in October of '68.
Yeah, no, that was after I left. I left in March of '68. No, I've talked to those people, and I've seen pictures. We tease them.
Okay.
You guys had it made.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they actually moved. We know where they moved. They moved up the hill across the other side of the flight line. When I was there, we were on the east side of the flight line, and they were over on the west side. So Yeah, but that was after we left. They're,
And also after you left, the Jokers escorted General Westmoreland to 9th Rock Division.
yeah.
And another month that summer, they escorted General Abrams to MACV-Duckmai Training Center.
The MACV, yeah, Duckmai, the training center. I was never there, but yeah, sure, they did a lot of this stuff. The unit did a lot of things, engaged in a lot of activity, battles, what have you, and it's quite an accomplished unit. And, yeah, the only other. There's 1,000 stories, but we don't have time for all that. But the one that I do want to bring up, it was December 8th, 1967, and in my hooch, the guy that slept across from me was Dick Crosby, and the guy to the left of me was Manuel Merida. Merida was from Texas, Crosby was from Colorado, and anyway, myself with the crew chief and the door gunner were assigned to a helicopter, a specific helicopter. Our helicopter was 904, and every 100 hours it goes in for some heavy maintenance. And anyway, ours went in for maintenance, so we were on another helicopter. We were flying 811, and flew it that morning, and we were doing local resupply, and we came back at lunchtime, and we're having lunch in the mess hall, and the maintenance guys came up to us and said, "Hey guys, 904 is out of maintenance. You can go ahead and transfer it back to your own, your regular chopper." So we went out and took all of our stuff off 811 and put it on 904, and then went off and flew missions for the rest of the day. We came back that night, and they were back there at the hooch, and I said, "Where's Merida and Crosby?" And he said, "Oh, you guys, that's right, you guys were out, you didn't hear. And they're missing, we don't know where they are." And what had happened was there was a mission that came up, and it was really just an admin mission to fly up north to Phu-Hep area, pick up a couple of people. I think actually they had some plans that they needed down at Division. And they were supposed to just go up there, pick that stuff up, and fly back. Very, very simple. And anyway, what had happened was that they flew up there, and they started coming back, and it was flew into some weather, I think monsoon, type conditions, and they disappeared. We never found them. And I'm trying to recall what year this was. The year the DC Sniper is, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit on this, but we never found them. Eventually, they did find them many, many years later. They flew into Mountain. They were all killed, and I felt so bad because, Crosby and Merida were both going to be home for Christmas. This was December 8th, and they would have both been home for Christmas. And, I'm sure their families were really looking forward to this. Instead, they get, notification that they're missing. And they weren't found until decades later. And they say things happen for a reason, and it's kind of making a long story out of this. But I was sitting around one time it was work had ended, it was the end of the day, and I've got my computer there. And I'm thinking to myself, gee, I wonder if I could find my old unit from Vietnam on the internet. And I do. I find the 48th, and they had put up a site not too long before that. And ironically, at the same time, they are planning to bury the remains of these people who died on 8/11. And it was Mr. Strange, Mr. Leeper were the two pilots, and Crosby and Merida. And it happened to be it was the same weekend that they caught the DC Sniper. Do you remember when that was?
93, I think?
No, it's well beyond that. Remember Malvo when they were the DC Sniper at the, what was that, 03 or? Unfortunately, I should have looked it up, but.
I think it might be 03, yeah.
I think it's 03. But it was that weekend, and I say things happen for a reason. I go up on the website, and lo and behold, they're planning this reunion in D.C., but it's a reunion and a funeral. And so this was...
Arlington?
Yes, Arlington. So...
Oh, it's 2002.
Okay, so I'm off by a year. But anyway, that was the first time I had met or talked to any of these guys from Vietnam since I left in '68. So I went down there. We had a reunion, and it was.
You just went down, or had you talked to anyone before you went down?
Well, I found one guy and called him, and everything was on the internet. You know, it's the location and all that. So,
okay.
So, but I did call this one guy, Paul, and anyway, had spoken to him. But went down, got a room, and spent the night down there.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a dinner that evening, and the following day we had at the chapel at Arlington. They had the service. Three of the soldiers, their families came in, but of course parents are all dead now. You know, there was no parents. It was a sister and cousins and what have you. And they did as only Arlington can. You know, a very, very nice ceremony.
Nice.
And they even had they still had Hueys down at Fort Belvoir, the airfield down at Belvoir in Virginia, and they did a flyover, and that was emotionally.
Wow, can't even imagine. Sherry was the sister, right?
Yes. Yeah, I just saw her in Alabama. She goes to the reunions.
Oh, that's cool. So the crash site was located and excavated in March of '93.
Mm-hmm.
Some personal effects and remains were recovered. No positive ID of the crew at that time.
It took a while. Yeah, they only had pieces, bone fragments, and what have you. It was one casket for all four.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's
I guess Sherry had to give us some DNA.
yes,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, but that was '93, and the crash occurred in '67, December of '67.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can see, it was decades later. You know, we had that evening when they never returned. You know, we continued anytime we flew. You were always trying, and look out.
Keeping an eye out.
Yeah, keep an eye out. And we thought, for the longest time, myself included, we thought that they may have flown out to sea because there's the geography there. There was a pass. You were right along the coast, but there was this pass, and there was a strip of land that went out. And what we thought was that maybe with the clouds moving in, he couldn't get into the pass, so he may have flown to the east to try to go around it, and got misoriented and perhaps literally ran out of fuel or flew into the water. That's what we thought.
Oh, okay.
Because we couldn't find a trace, nothing. And as it turns out, we were flying by them all the time. They were down there on the side of that mountain, that hill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. See, where we flew was the Central Highlands, so you had hills, mountains all over the place.
This was Vung Ro Bay?
It was Vung Ro Bay. They were actually on the north side of it.
In September of '73, a source reported that 3 local villagers of Hua Shuang, Xuan,
This woman, I think,
village reported they discovered a U.S. helicopter with 2 or 3 remains in uniform at the crash site, and other reports were received that possibly correlated with it, but were resolved to other cases. I forget where I read it, but I read that a Vietnam hunter found remains and also had dog tags.
I had heard that also, a similar report.
And I just surmised that if he had the dog tags, wouldn't that have held up the identification or no?
Well, I mean, if you could positively say these dog tags came from that, that site or that person, I suppose, but yeah. But they're pretty thorough. They have that lab out in Hawaii, and they generally do the DNA. That's why, Sherry, had to give DNA so that they could positively identify her brother.
So, when you think back to that nasty weather that night, how often did you have weather like that and you really didn't have a choice if you were flying or not?
Well, when the monsoons came in, your flying was restricted, but we flew in the rain, that kind of thing. For the most part, the weather was pretty good, and even with the monsoons, I mean, it wasn't like it rained for 5 days continually. It was like thunderstorms. But when it did rain, I mean, my Lord, it was like sheets of rain, coming through. It was just unbelievable.
Like nothing you had ever seen before?
Oh, yeah, I remember the first time I ever saw it. Holy cow, look at that water.
So some of the others who posted other than you were Larry Gardner and Dan Krantz.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Larry was there at the same time we were. But, there were quite a few of us at the burial.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, yeah, there was. It was a reunion of sorts, and they're actually
sad reunion.
Yeah, it was. It was bittersweet, and a lot of us reconnected, but having a funeral at the same time was. But at least for their family, I felt sorry for the parents because, they died not knowing what happened to their sons. But at least for people like Sherry and Marita, his family.
Oh, okay.
They came in from Texas. They were there, what have you. Yeah, the only one that for some reason, strange, no one from the family showed up. I don't know why.
Do you know where he was from?
No, he was kind of new in the unit. Actually, I think Leeper was too. Wally, I remember them both. Both quite well. Actually, flew with them. Anyway, getting long time ago now.
Oh, Strange was from Chico, California. I've actually been there, Northern California.
Mm-hmm.
Leeper was from Wellington, Colorado.
Yes, yeah, he was. And Marita was from Texas, and Crosby had some ties in Colorado too. But anyway, it was kind of, like I say, Crosby slept right across from me, and Leeper was over on the side.
For 9 months, right? For 9 months?
Yeah, however many months it was. Yeah.
So, what was your homecoming like?
No, we go back to the missing records. Okay, I get to, we fly out. I go to Cameron and fly in Okinawa, Japan, and Fort Lewis, Washington, Port Air Force Base, Fort Lewis. I'm at Fort Lewis, and I'm there on a Friday, and I'm all excited. I'm going to be out of the Army and go home and what have you, and they can't discharge me because my records are incomplete. So
how did you get orders to go if they were incomplete?
Well, remember I told you Captain Van Mill took me around, and there was enough. They had enough there to cut orders. Yeah, and, there was a war going on. They cut a lot of corners, I'm sure.
Oh, I see.
So they wouldn't discharge me. So now we can't discharge you until we verify with Ben Harrison, Indiana. We have to call. Of course, this is again before the internet and all this other stuff, and communication's really slow. Says we have to call, but unfortunately, it's Friday afternoon here in Washington. They're already closed. So I ended up spending the weekend in Fort Lewis, sitting there twiddling my thumbs because they couldn't discharge me. So I got discharged on Monday, and they gave me my final pay and was in my uniform, and proceeded to go back to the East Coast. But there was no warm welcome. There was no, hey, glad. The only, it was your friends and family who gave you the warm welcome, and that type of thing. No one spat on me or what have you, but I didn't get a lot of friendly looks or, that kind of thing. It's people, in some cases, it's almost like they view you as the enemy or something. It's kind of strange. There's a tie-in here, though. It's a little. When I came back from Desert Storm, we landed at McGuire, right down here at Dix McGuire. Came in on a flight, and they put us on buses, and they drove us home, on the buses home being Fort Monmouth, and, excuse me, coming down, about like through 537, they took that route, and all along the way, people were cheering and waving and had flags and what have you. It was this big celebration. And my family met me at Monmouth, my wife, and we're on the bus, and I told my wife, I said, this is the American public clearing their conscience.
Exactly.
Yeah. From Vietnam. Because Vietnam was just, there was no welcome, and like I said, in a lot of ways you were looked down upon. And it continued, because I came back in the Army in 1970, and, I was traveling around airports in 1970 in the military, and occasionally you'd meet people who were nice and who wanted to know a little bit about you and, where you were going and what you were doing or things like that. There were some very nice people. But so many times, so, and it's what really hurt it was from your contemporaries. It was the young people.
Oh.
Well, because it was, they're getting all of this thrown at them from the media and the colleges, the liberal professors and what have you, and then you had the draft dodger element. You had the people who didn't want to go, didn't try to avoid the military service.
What about your contemporaries who you knew personally?
For the most part, when I came back home, they were okay, and they knew you for who you were, what you were, that type
That's
of
good.
thing. Yeah, so they were okay. It was really more the people who didn't know you, who treated you that way. But again, like I said, I experienced it later on too. Even in 1970, when I came back in, you get that kind of treatment, so to speak. The nice. Like I say, I never got spit on, but I got the nasty looks and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one time, a younger soldier was having a hard time, and with his duffel bag. And those things were quite heavy. It's hard to move around. And somebody was. I remember overhearing somebody making fun of him. That kind type of thing. And it was a young girl. College age person. But fortunately, like I say, at least nobody assaulted me or anything like that.
That's good.
But again, it wasn't a warm welcome.